Hello, my friend. Thank you so much for joining together with me as we work together on healing childhood wounds, supporting your partner's growth path. This whole year, as you've noticed, we have started out with tenaciously going forward to welcome the differences in our relationships. We're taking deep breaths, we're allowing ourselves to see that we're better together, but we're also working so hard in these past years on the Enneagram and Marriage podcast that I didn't want our shadow to be that we weren't also working to understand our partners. So today, of course, I want you to learn about your childhood wounds again. But I also, and especially, want you to be leaning in for how to work with your partner and the childhood patterns that they probably bring into the marriage sometimes. So, in this episode, we're going to talk about ways to support and not just fix, triggers, ways that you can create safety for healing, which I heard about on Instagram today. Also, practical tips for growth. So, just stick around. We'll be doing all of that in just a moment. But first, today's marriage minute, it happened to me at breakfast. My husband always lines up the toaster, the blender, everything in the same spot, and then wants to have this meal that is very quiet. And I had forgotten that he lines up the blender like that. And I was thinking, wait a minute, we have Melody's, my nine's, all of her tools over here in this corner. And it was kind of getting crowded looking. And I'm like, the bottom of that blender probably isn't in use. And then Wes just noticed it and he's like, oh my gosh, where's the bottom of this blender? And I was like, oh, it's just underneath the cupboard right there, under where it usually is. And he's like, this needs to be kept out. It's just so funny that my body types, 9 and 1, have to have their things in certain places. And so I just took a deep breath and I recognized that one thing about his own childhood pattern was he didn't have a whole lot of consistency with meals, sitting down. There was a lot of chaos and disorder. And so just giving him that sense of peace and things where they always are was something for me to ponder and to think about. And doesn't mean that I always step into that perfectly. You know, I'm a 7 who's running all over literally. But it was also good for me to just pause, think, reflect, and be like, oh, absolutely, we can keep that there. That is such a win for him and means almost nothing to me. So I want you to think about that for your marriage and relationship. What would be a win for your partner that would be low-hanging fruit for you that really doesn't bother you, that doesn't take anything from you, but you can lean in and love? So I'm really excited that we can talk about that together. You can even pause me if you're like, I need to write this down to think about it. Because we're going to go through each Enneagram type in a minute just to think about what we might notice every single type, some of the wounds might be. But first, in general, I just want to talk about how with your partner, sometimes you'll notice that in general, it doesn't have to be that they're this or that type to have some of the things we would say for instance, a 9, we might say they feel unseen sometimes. But I just want to reiterate as we generally talk first about childhood wounds, sometimes that can happen even for a 7 or a 2 or a 3. So don't nuance so much that you think, oh my gosh, I've pigeonholed my partner into just this one small parameter. Instead, remember your partner has many patterns at work as well as their main typology, and allow yourself to notice just what are some of the patterns in general that you've seen your partner just tell you about from childhood. So, to clarify, before we put on our Enneagram hat, we're going to take it off. We're just going to come at this episode with a deep breath and some clarity around just thinking in general about your partner's childhood wound patterns. So that might even for some of you have come in the form of things they've told you over the years. Like, oh, my mom couldn't be there for me that much. She was working a lot, or my dad was abusive. And so I had to, fight him off. And there might be things like that that they've told you. And you have this awareness that because of that, they don't want to be taken advantage of. They obviously will have a wound, a protective area for themselves, a place which feels sharp or hurtful, or even if it's just a scar at this point, there's still some sensitivity. You know that, right? You've probably got certain places on your body. I have this place right on the edge of my finger where I was doing dishes. isn't it always dishes? And I broke a glass on this little finger when I was in college, and my friend who lived in an apartment nearby drove me. But when I touch that area, it's still sensitive. And Wes feels that about his belly button interior for some reason. I'm like, I'm the one who had kids there, but that's it for him. And so it's so funny to know that we have these wounds and sensitivities, but it's also serious when we actually need to know that. So just think about your partner. What are their, not just the physical wounds, but the emotional wounds you've heard them saying, this is part of me. And also notice that if maybe they haven't shown you those wounds, they may show up in arguments where you might notice, gosh, they always leave. It seems like they have a pattern where they need to go self-regulate by themselves, or they always act up around in-laws or extended family or this or that friend, or during stress or communication. And I want you to support growth in general by first realizing that each of us has patterns that we take on when we're in stress. That's totally normal. We're trying to protect ourselves. We're trying to find healing and soothing. I know for my 4 and my son, who's a 6/7, they often go to the piano to get those feelings out. And sometimes even when they're happy, they do that. But there are so many different ways that you probably have noticed your partner just acting during stress times. And I want you to take off that judgment for a moment. Take another deep breath if you need to, and just allow yourself to create a bit of a safe space for them. Even if it's just they get a little loud, but I'm going to let them have a little bit of loudness before I start correcting and saying, shh, you're too loud. Just knowing that maybe you're married to an 8 and they do get a little loud and they don't want you to be so sensitive that they can't be real, because maybe they say, I have a passion here. And so please don't quiet me all the time. Or maybe, like I said, they need to withdraw for a bit because they don't think as fast on their feet as you. And in that case, creating a safe space looks like you saying, hey, I want to share the stress with you. I'm going to do some self-regulating. Well, I know you're going to probably need some time to think this over. And when you can premeditate just a bit, not a lot where you're hyper vigilant and mind reading, but just a little bit, even if it's internal, it helps because you've already anticipated a bit of defensiveness from them, a bit of self-protection. You know some of their main coping strategies. So it depersonalizes it a little bit when things come up because you've already done your interior work. And if your spouse is super chill, you could also say hey, yeah, I noticed that about you. So I'm just taking a few minutes and letting you have a little time to rant or stress clean or whatever it might be. So you'll have to notice that together with your partner. Does it irritate them further if you name it? Or is it some internal work that can be shared that makes them feel closer to you? Like, oh, thank you for understanding me. Different moments may require different strategies. So it's also okay to find some friction. Friction comes when any two things rub up against each other, and everything has friction, even to the micro level, as my son and I are learning in physics right now. So it's okay to have a little bit of that. But creating that safety for them and yourself means those deep breaths so that you oxygenate, and it also means some pausing and reflecting. So as you work on these, you might say, how will I know if we're getting anywhere? How will I know if we're finding any trust? And I'll just say, you'll find better communication, a little bit more openness to notice your own flaws, to not just that hyperfixation we have on our partner's unhealth and flaws. That's the human tendency. Less triggering because you'll notice you guys are being a little healthier together, and deeper intimacy as well as renewed connection. You might find, gosh, we talk about things more, or we're not as likely to pretend we're not stressed. I know for my husband and I know my hormonal cycles, and when he or I say it, it isn't an offensive thing anymore. Whereas in our earlier marriage days, I might have felt more defensive. He might have felt more aggressive, like, oh, she's having the cycle time, or I might have been like, it's not about that. Now I can say the both and. I'm both experiencing emotions that need to be processed, and I think I'm heightened with that because it's this time. So it's important for you to realize whatever your strategies are. Yes, I'm stressed, so you're going to hear me be this, that, or the other is okay to say, as long as you also try to bring support in versus defensiveness. So that takes a lot of pausing and reflecting. But let's remember the adage that what we don't want to do is that insane thing that never works, which is the same thing you always used to do. So I'm calling you to pivot a little bit more and create safety. And that will be a learning curve as you identify friction. Before we talk about each type now, the only thing I want to make sure of is that you do expect a little bit of friction. It'd be a wonderful treat if you didn't have any, but I always recommend to my listeners here and to my clients not to bring anything up if you can't handle a little friction. Let's say you're on your edge, it's your last moment, and you're like, oh, I've just had such a hard day. I've had it up to here. This is not the moment to pick at your spouse or partner because you know at that moment they're going to be like, okay, I'm going to be defensive. And now you guys are going to have a bit more of a blow up. Otherwise, you can say to yourself, gosh, this is really irritating me. I hope this isn't a pattern. I think it might be. When I'm calmer, I need to address this. And if you need to say something, you could say, hey, when I'm calmer, I need to address this, but I've had a huge day. And another thing some of my couples like to do, send an email, send a text if you absolutely have to, and just be as kind as possible. And that will help a lot too. Okay, well, let's talk about the 9 types. Let's start with 9, as we did also this week on Monday when we got a chance to just go through the Enneagram in real life. I loved our episode with Steph Barron Hall, and I want to continue that thread that sometimes we do prioritize our 9s first since they're so patient. And I want to encourage you, if you're not a 9, know that most of the time 9s listen through every type. That's why they get frustrated. And a lot of the rest of us are just like, well, I fast forwarded to my type. But they understand 9s. No, I've got friends, family, coworkers, siblings, parents, grandparents, whatever it might be, where they are the other type. So they're leaning in more and learning more. So when a 9 is stressed, it often shows up, of course, as agreeing just to avoid conflict. It can show up as so many other things, but we're just giving this couple of small reminders today that when your 9 is looking like they just don't want to get involved, it could be because they're feeling like you don't listen or because they don't matter. Might even be a bit of both. What we do know is that it's very difficult to bring up if they're not used to talking out what's bothering them or hurting them. So understand that if you find them to be passive aggressive, it's a good move to lean in a bit to say, I'm listening to you, and then really do. And for you 9s, healing looks like expressing needs even when it creates tension. I'm excited for you guys to hear an episode coming up that I think will help you a lot. I have a 3-9 couple coming on soon that I've already recorded with. And it was such a blessing to really get to that space. Craig and Laura Cooper with them to talk about how they have grown past this. So I want to encourage 9s, listen to that episode, but just hear me say Laura has found a way to keep expressing needs. So very good. Okay, let's talk about the 8. When the 8 is really having that inner childhood wound show up, it can look like taking control when they're vulnerable. And it can feel to you as a partner like, my gosh, they're controlling every little thing. And this is really irritating. And I don't like it. And I feel uncomfortable. But to them, they're feeling like I need to do this because I don't feel safe. So know that it isn't something that they're trying to do to be mean. It just does not feel safe. And so they are like, the way I feel safe is I get control. And a great way for an 8 to step into healing and growth is to ask for help in hard times instead of just managing everything themselves, to say instead, I really appreciate if you could do X, Y, or Z. Maybe give that option versus do this right now. I need you to go move the car. I need you to do this. Just say, hey, there's a few things that are overwhelming to me right now. And I'm not afraid. You can clarify that. But I also do feel like I need some support. That is a huge growth move for you. And if you're a partner of an 8, you can say, do you need some support? And if so, here's what I'd be willing to do. That goes a long way. Just don't stand down and pretend that nothing matters. Now, when you have a 7 who has an inner wound, you might find them just bypassing the emotional growth. You might find them, for instance, planning the next vacation during the current one, or at dinner talking about something else that's pleasant instead of really talking about what needs to be shared. And by the way, this can go for good things as well as bad things. I had something good happen this week, and I let out a little squeal, and I didn't want my kids to really know because I wanted to bypass the emotions. My family's really good at picking up on that, and they dug it out of me. And I am able to say, yes, as a seven, that's really hard for me sometimes, even the positive emotions, but the negative ones, of course. And so the healing can look like sitting with your partner through painful feelings, letting them see your vulnerability in that way. Whereas for eight, the vulnerability was asking and receiving. And for the seven, it's about letting people sit with you in the highs and the lows and sharing a bit of that. Because for a seven, that's the part that feels vulnerable is the emotions. Okay, now for a six, sixes can show up with that childhood wound of just feeling unsafe. So constantly checking their partner's commitments and really allowing their partner instead to have some of their own agency is beautiful and important, and trusting their partner. And the healing looks like trusting their partner's love without needing the reassurance, and just remembering that they love you, letting there be pauses, letting there be moments to have peace together without disrupting and reacting and pre-planning everything. And of course, we're just noticing together that all of these patterns stem from some childhood space that you can check in about. That's really good for you both to know because there are reasons why we do this. But it doesn't mean we get out of the work. It doesn't mean we can bypass the work. Now, for fives, they can show up as having been overwhelmed in some way, just simply withdrawing when their partner needs connection and not showing up again until they, the five, feels the connection is bad. And so often the five will be busy researching and preserving energy and security orienting, and they won't even know their partner is upset because this is their way of just doing the healing of a childhood wound, but it bypasses a lot of the partnership. So it's important that the five stay present during difficult conversations. And this might even go for the partner of the five as well. In this way, it does go with the partner to say, I've noticed myself, if you're the partner, watching my five slip away and I haven't been saying anything because maybe you got into that rhythm as well, or you felt like, I don't always want to have to do it. But a good way is to continue the work that you started. And I feel like I can see so many couples with fives who say, and lots of different types, I don't want to have to do that, but we have to do sustainability measures because we're largely going to look a lot like our type. Now, we don't want to look like just our type, but yeah, you're going to have that if you're with a five. They're going to be preserving energy because childhood taught them to do that. So, coming into their space and saying, hey, I'm here, I need some attention is going to be a practice. And so, make sure you both do that. And five, that you know this is going to be regular and you'll need to become more expansive. So the four shows up as creating relational drama to feel significant. And this can be one of those moments where, as I said, sometimes checking in with a four, when I said earlier, like check in with how your partner wants to be approached, this can change and shift for a four. If you figure it out, they feel like, well, where's the mystery to that? But many fours, as they realize that life will come with its own changes along with the seasons, can start to relax around the right now and just say, right now, if you ask me what I need, I'll tell you right now, I need to go in my room for a little bit. If I feel icy to you, know that I'm just processing and I'm not upset with you. Or maybe they are and they say, okay, I'm a little bit upset with you or a lot upset, and here's what it is. I'm going to take the mature road. Let's go on a walk and talk. These are the kinds of things that need to be said and done. But sometimes the drama can come out even in ways and spaces that feel like it's happening a lot for the partner. So the piece of finding just joy and just actual peace in the ordinary moments will be a gift for both of you. And as I said, it's a choice as well as a result. In this case, you will choose peace, you will experience peace when you just say, you know what, we're just having dinner. I don't need to over emote here. I don't need to over analyze. I'm allowed to be stable and secure in my love, and I choose that. And I also choose other moments where I will need to emote. So it doesn't mean it's an always or never. Now, the type 3 shows up often as working late to avoid feeling inadequate. They've got a lot of goals. Sometimes they're not met. One thing I do at the end of my busy days, I'm not a 3, but I do have 3 moments, is I try to celebrate. I've talked about this before, but just some of my wins. What were my wins today? And that helps a lot. Others of you love a gratitude practice, which I do as well. And I spend more time on that in the morning, but allowing yourself to say, hey, I notice what I'm doing here. I'm working late, and sharing vulnerably, because of course, this can be a childhood wound for you that felt like it needed to be done. The achievement needed to happen. And just sharing that, sharing vulnerably, hey, this is a pattern for me, but I have fear of failure. And I just want to check in with you and let you know sometimes I push hard for that reason. And it's a inner wiring for me that I'm trying to work on, but also sharing about that if you're the partner too. Yeah, I see that. I know that. Let me validate your worth. Let me work with you on our budget so you don't have to feel like you're the only one working hard to either save or create. So important to come alongside your 3 and let them know you see their beautiful heart and you want to make them feel secure. Okay, so a 2 struggling with the childhood wounds ends up with panic when their partner needs space. They feel like, wait a second, I thought I was your everything and I want to be your everything. Now, of course, a 2 will choose who they do this with, but if you're their person, they don't feel the need for as much space and self care. They just want to connect. And so when you need that space, healing for either of you can look like taking a self care day without guilt. Like, you are my special person and I love being together, but I'm also my own entity and you're an amazing spouse and you are my person, like I said. But, I also have to operate in the regular world and I also have family and friends and others that have important space in my life. And I've heard a lot of people have to argue with their 2 sometimes about this to let them know, yes, you hold a high place, but God holds the highest, and then you, and then my family, or whatever else it might be, so that the 2 can feel like, you're not slighting me. This is just life. And I have to get my own self-care. I can't expect you to take care of me all the time, and vice versa. So a type 1 can often show up with harsh self or spouse or world criticism. For example, when dishes aren't done right is the common one you hear, or towels aren't folded correctly, or I feel like in my home it's more roads. I'll feel like Wes will comment on the roads around us too. He's a social one. So I think it can come out against oneself, one's partner, the systems. In the past, it's come out at me. In the past, it's come out itself. Does occasionally. But sometimes you'll notice that with any of these, the subtype slash instinctual variant of self-preserving, sexual, or social creates a different dynamic a little bit. So to nuance there, healing can look like being able to laugh when any of these things aren't done or aligned or refined in the way the one sees it. Like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe they don't do a Michigan left in Florida, or that that the dishwasher was made in this weird way where the buttons keep popping off, or that the, kitchen was properly set up with the blender when I had it and now it isn't. And so you're hearing me say, like, these don't have to be catastrophic. And for a 1, especially if they're struggling with any OCD, they might feel like, I feel out of sorts. So taking those deep breaths and pauses is also helpful and healthy for the 1 here, to just allow in some, I can do this. I can quiet down my mind, which feels disorganized right now and feels in disarray. And just like I said to the 2 ones, allowing yourself to laugh, to have fun, but especially just some self care can help any rigidity in the body space. So these are tips for you and your partner. And so if you heard one for them today, I hope you'll share it. Or if you have a friend who you just know does not have some tools, make sure they take a listen here just to remember these basic practices for each type and the reminders of creating safety together that we shared in a general way before we went specific. And if you just want to have fun and enjoy time learning together, do not forget today's my last reminder for you that the Enneagram in Marriage coaching certification and masterclass is starting tomorrow. So use the code marriage for 500 off, and I hope to see you there. Otherwise, I want to end here with a little moment of a bit of a joy challenge. Notice one way, just like I said at the beginning of today, one way your partner's maybe more annoying habit might actually be their childhood protection showing up with love. Then tell them, I see you, I get it, and watch what happens. It's going to be beautiful. So I hope you have a great week. Everything's in the show notes, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.